They say the heart forgets nothing, even when the body pretends it has moved on. I used to be someone's wife, someone's mother, someone who mattered in the tangible ways. Dinner on the stove, laundry folded just so, and goodnight kisses offered at the same time every evening, like a ritual that kept the house from cracking. Ron and I married young. Too young, perhaps, but it felt like the right kind of reckless then. He had this slow, deliberate way of speaking that made you believe he thought deeply about everything, even if he never really said much. We bought a modest house in Maplewood, the kind with pale blue siding and a porch swing that groaned with age. I filled it with books and plants. He filled it with silence. When Harper was born, I was 25. She was my world from the very first breath, fierce and fussy with a cry that could peel paint. 2 years later, Colin arrived, a quiet, observant baby with these enormous brown eyes that seemed to ask questions before he could talk. The house grew loud with cartoons and shrieking and spilled juice boxes. And I clung to the chaos, wrapped myself in it like armor. Ron went to work, came home, paid bills. He did all the things that made him a good man on paper. But he never paused at Harper's bedtime stories. Never cried at Colin's first piano recital. I lived in that noise, because silence, I feared, would reveal the truth. We were living separate lives, orbiting the same house like ghosts wearing flesh. The years blurred. First steps, scraped knees, birthday cakes. And then they were gone. Harper moved to Portland to teach sculpture, always with ink on her fingers and passion in her voice. Colin stayed closer, studying data analytics at the university 10 miles away, but he rarely came home except for Thanksgiving and the occasional Sunday dinner. One morning I made pancakes out of habit and realized there was no one to eat them. Ron had started leaving earlier for work, coming home later. When he was there, he buried himself in the news or his faded Sudoku books. We stopped sharing meals, stopped talking. Not out of anger, but apathy. That night I wandered into the attic. It was dusty and cold, filled with boxes labeled in my handwriting. I opened one marked 2009 and found Harper's old sketchbooks. Pages filled with odd little creatures and strange cities. I traced one drawing with my finger until tears blurred the lines. Later I sat at the dining room table, my coffee gone cold, and looked at my wedding ring. Caught the morning light through the window, and for the first time I saw it clearly. It had lost its shine. When Ron came home that evening, I asked him to sit. "I think we've reached the end," I said, voice quiet but unshaking. He looked up, surprised but not shocked. "Yeah," he murmured after a long silence. "I suppose we have." There was no blame in the room, only acknowledgement, and the strange relief of finally speaking aloud what had grown like mold beneath our walls. We didn't scream. We didn't cry. We simply unraveled. I moved into the guest room the next day. The sheets were stiffer there, the pillow too firm, but at least it didn't smell like Ron's aftershave. He didn't ask me to go. I didn't ask him to stay. We didn't tell the kids. Not yet. I wasn't ready for Harper's worried sighs or Colin's unreadable stare. Instead I walked. Every morning through the neighborhood. The same trees, same cracked sidewalk, but a different woman walking it. I began carrying a notebook, sketching houses and birds, anything to prove I was still observing, still alive. One afternoon I saw Colin's apartment building in the distance. I had never been inside. He'd invited me once briefly, but I had said no. I didn't want to know how easily he lived without us. But something tugged at me that day. I stopped by the market. Bought trout, rosemary, a bottle of cheap white wine. I didn't text or call. I just knocked. He answered the door wearing a faded hoodie and socks. His hair was tousled, and for a second he looked like the boy who used to ask for grilled cheese at midnight. "Mom. Dinner," I said, holding up the bag. "Is that okay?" He stepped aside and let me in. His apartment was surprisingly warm. Records lined the shelves. The scent of pine and something herbal filled the air. I unpacked the groceries while he set the table. "Did something happen?" he asked gently. "Nothing new," I said. "Just didn't want to eat alone." He didn't press. We cooked together. Talked about inconsequential things. The trout sizzled in the pan and I caught him glancing at me more than once. But not with worry. With curiosity. "You can stay the night if you want," he said afterward, clearing the plates. "Spare room's clean." I almost said no. I was tired. And the thought of returning to a house that no longer felt like mine made my skin crawl. "Thanks," I whispered. That night I lay in the small guest bed, the scent of rosemary still clinging to my hair. And for the first time in months I didn't feel like a ghost. Something had begun. Something I couldn't name. Colin's guest room was small, barely more than a nook with a twin bed and an old bookshelf, but it was warm. A gray wool blanket lay folded at the foot, the lamp gave off a soft amber glow, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon. It didn't feel like a son's spare room. It felt like someone had prepared it for someone who mattered. I lay on my back, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the occasional creak of floorboards as Colin moved around in the kitchen. It was strange, the intimacy of hearing him from the other side of the wall, not as a boy stomping to his room, but as a man cleaning up after a dinner we had shared like equals. That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was restless, but because I felt still in a way I hadn't in years. There was no Ron snoring beside me, no ache in my chest. Just the scent of rosemary, the warmth of Colin's wine still lingering on my lips, and a quiet sense of being noticed. In the morning I woke early and made coffee. His kitchen was neat but not sterile, filled with little signs of someone who lives alone and enjoys it. A cracked ceramic mug. A basil plant on the sill. A fridge magnet that said good enough is still pretty good. Colin emerged from his room barefoot and rumpled, blinking sleep from his eyes. When he saw me he smiled. A slow, surprised kind of smile that made me feel suddenly younger. "Morning," he said. "I made coffee. You didn't have to. I wanted to." We sat at the small kitchen table as the sun peeked through the blinds. It should have felt awkward. But it didn't. He asked about my walks, my sketchbook, even mentioned one of his professors whose mother had also left her husband at 50. He said it casually, like he was offering me a permission slip I hadn't asked for. When I left later that morning, he walked me to the door, his hand brushing lightly against my shoulder as he opened it. A small thing. A gentle thing. But it stayed with me all day. Back home the house felt foreign. The dishwasher hummed, the heater ticked, and Ron's empty mug sat on the counter like a relic from a former life. I wandered the living room, pausing by the piano no one played anymore, and found myself aching for the strange comfort of Colin's quiet presence. Days passed. Colin texted me a photo of a rosemary bush growing wild in the park. "Thought of you. Want to walk there sometime?" I replied before I could overthink it. "Tomorrow." Late morning. That became a rhythm. Walks. Market runs. Shared meals. He never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. Never treated me like someone broken. He just listened. Not with pity but with interest. One evening, after a long walk through a tree-lined path, we stopped at a bench to rest. The air was crisp, the sky bruised with sunset. "You seem lighter," he said, looking out across the empty park. "Do I?" He nodded. "You smile more. Maybe I'm just tired of pretending not to." His gaze turned toward me, soft but focused. "Pretending for who?" I hesitated, then exhaled. "Everyone, I suppose. Myself most of all." He didn't respond right away. Just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. On it was a sketch. My sketch. Of the path we'd walked the week before, shaded and clean with my initials in the corner. "I found it on the kitchen table," he said. "Didn't think you'd mind." I stared at the paper, my heart doing a strange flip. "I don't," I said softly. "Not at all." We didn't speak for the rest of the walk. But his hand brushed mine once and I didn't pull away. That night I lay awake again. Not with sorrow, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. What was this? Something simple. Something kind. Something unspoken. And yet there it was. I didn't go back home for 3 nights. Not because I had nowhere else to be, but because I finally realized I didn't want to be anywhere that felt like forgetting myself. Colin didn't question it. He cleared space. Found me a drawer. Stocked the fridge with the yogurt I liked. In silence he built a room for me in his life, not with declarations but with details. And somehow that was more intimate than any confession. One evening we shared a bottle of Malbec and a silence that felt sacred. He played records. Bill Evans' old jazz standards that filled the small living room like warm honey, and we sat with our feet up on the coffee table, the sound of rain tapping lightly on the windows. I turned toward him after the second glass. "Did I ever tell you I wanted to be an architect once?" He shook his head intrigued. "I loved shapes, bagels, space. I'd draw floor plans for pretend houses when I was little." I laughed at the memory, wine soft. "I made one once with a room just for sadness. A quiet place where I could go and cry if I needed. Colin's smile faded. He tilted his head, studying me. Do you still need that room? No, I said, my voice barely audible. I think I just left it. He didn't speak. He just leaned his head back, eyes closed, as if my words were music he wanted to sit with for a while. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen rinsing out the glasses. I felt him behind me before I heard him. His presence was warm, magnetic, but not invasive. You don't have to keep doing the dishes, he said gently. I know. So I did. He gave my hands something to do. I like the way you make this place feel, he added quietly. It used to just be space. Now it feels like home. My hands stopped moving. I stared into the sink, the hum of the water suddenly distant. I never meant to stay, I whispered. I just didn't want to be alone. He stepped closer, so close I could feel the air change between us. You're not alone. I turned slowly, and for a long moment we just looked at each other. His eyes weren't the eyes of a child or a student or a distant son. They were the eyes of a man, watchful, calm, uncertain but open. I felt it then. A flicker. Not passion, not lust. Something older. Something deeper. Recognition. I looked away first. He reached past me to turn off the tap. Our hands touched briefly in the dark. I'm going to bed, I said, my voice too steady. He didn't stop me. But that night, as I lay in the guest room beneath the blanket he tucked over my legs without asking, I stared at the ceiling and felt something rise in my chest. Not fear. Not longing. Readiness. Whatever this was, it wasn't wrong. It was uncharted. Unspeakable. And yet, it asked to be explored. And the most frightening thing of all? I wanted to. Spring arrived early. The wind softened, the trees bloomed with that tentative hope that only March can carry. I found myself rising before the sun, standing barefoot on Colin's small balcony with a mug of coffee, watching the city exhale. Each morning I told myself I would go back. That I'd pack a box, tell Ron I'd be moving on officially, and close the door on that chapter. But the truth was, I had already left. The moment I saw my own reflection in Colin's eyes and didn't flinch, I had gone. The morning I returned to the house, it was to gather my journals. Nothing more. Ron was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a crossword puzzle with a pen he no longer bothered to use. He looked up, mildly surprised. Need something? Buy books, I said. He nodded, said nothing else. No accusations. No requests. He didn't ask where I'd been. I didn't tell him. That was our language now, omission. As I left, I paused in the doorway. I'm not coming back, I said. He nodded again. Not unkindly. That was it. Closure wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A door clicking shut on its own weight. I returned to Colin's place carrying a box of journals and a heart a little lighter. He opened the door without a word, as if he'd sensed it, my final crossing. We fell into a routine. Shared groceries, dinners, the occasional walk through the neighborhood when neither of us wanted to be indoors. He never touched me. Never even brushed against me, as though whatever lived between us was too sacred to risk mishandling. But the tension lived there, gentle, aching. One night we sat together on the couch watching an old documentary about constellations. The narrator's voice was soft, poetic. Colin turned to me. Did you know some stars we see are already dead? The light just hasn't stopped traveling yet. I smiled faintly. Sounds familiar. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. What happens now? He asked, not looking at me. For you, I mean. I don't know, I said. I've lived for everyone else for so long, I don't remember what I want. He looked at me then, truly looked. Maybe, he said, you start by doing the things you stopped allowing yourself. I didn't reply. But I reached for his hand. Just that. No words. And he held it. No implication. No boundaries crossed. Only presence. Recognition. Something silent and deep, like roots growing in the dark. Weeks passed. We didn't speak about what we were. We didn't have to. It was not a romance, not yet. But it was the shape of something sacred. Something just beginning. One evening, as we folded laundry together in the soft light of the living room, I glanced at him. You know, I said, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life being invisible. He paused, holding one of my scarves in his hand. You've never been invisible. You just stopped looking at yourself. I didn't cry. I kissed his cheek. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel ashamed of wanting more. I moved into a new apartment that spring. A little loft above a florist shop. Full of windows and light. Colin helped paint the walls. He never assumed he'd live there. He never had to. He came by with wine and records. Sometimes he'd stay late, sometimes he'd leave early. But always with care. Always with that glimmer in his eyes, the one that said, "I see you." And I saw him too. We were something unspoken, undefined, and yet deeply understood. Not forbidden. Not wrong. Just unexpected. And exactly what we needed. The kind of connection that doesn't demand a name. Only the courage to follow it. To the edge of the map and maybe, just maybe, beyond. I kissed his cheek. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel ashamed of wanting more. I moved into a new apartment that spring. A little loft above a florist shop. Full of windows and light. Colin helped paint the walls. He never assumed he'd live there. He never had to. He came by with wine and records. Sometimes he'd stay late, sometimes he'd leave early. But always with care. Always with that glimmer in his eyes, the one that said, "I see you." And I saw him too. We were something unspoken, undefined, and yet deeply understood. Not forbidden. Not wrong. Just unexpected. And exactly what we needed. The kind of connection that doesn't demand a name. Only the courage to follow it. To the edge of the map and maybe, just maybe, beyond.